Okay, we are live. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, my friends, and welcome Dr. Gerald Schroeder in our second of a three-part series on science and religion, friends and foes. I'm so excited to have our very, very special guest. I was just telling Dr. Schroeder how I and my entire family are huge fans of his amazing books and scholarship, Genesis and the Big Bang, God According to God. Dr. Gerald Schroeder earned his BS, MS, and PhD in nuclear physics and earth and planetary sciences from MIT. And he also taught at MIT physics for 7 years. He has served as a consultant to various governments worldwide, been published in Time, Newsweek, Scientific American. He is the author of this amazing book, Genesis, the Big Bang, The Discovery of Harmony Between Modern Science and the Bible. Also in another amazing book called The Science of God, The Hidden Face of God, God According to God. His works appear in 11 different languages, and he is a lecturer at Aish HaTorah in Jerusalem, at the Discovery, the Seminar, Essentials, and a lot of other programs that Aish runs. He focuses on topics of evolution, cosmology, and the age of the universe. Welcome, Dr. Schroeder. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the
Well,
fun.
I really, yes, 100%. This is fun. So before we get into some of the, I guess, apparent contradictions that we're trying to work out between religion and science, tell us what drew you to the world of science and what value that you have as a religious Jew see in studying science.
Well, I don't think you can get truthfully, I don't want to frighten some people away or whatever. However, but if you read in the introduction to Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed, and then I think also in part 3, he makes it very clear that essentially when the Torah came into the world, it split into two parts. One was written down and one was in nature. And he says the only way that you can, it says it explicitly in the introduction, I guess that may be why people burned his books, that the only way you can know God is, of course, through the revelation of the word, but also you are like to quote from part 3, like a blind person searching for the door if you don't also know Madat Teva, the science of nature. That's what he calls. He says to fully understand his Hebrew word Madai Elokut, which is the science of God. That's not how I got the title for that book. My wife chose the title, but then I noticed there it was in his introduction, Madai Elokut, the science. To know the science of God, you also have to know the science of nature, because the Torah is in two parts, and nature is showing us how God works. So,
Wow, that's beautiful.
I was in science, deep into science already before I started to search for, what makes this world work and how you get this shiluv, this integration between the nature of the world and the revelations in the world and how they come together to give a full picture.
Beautiful. And what is your most powerful argument? I mean, as a scientist, really so curious, what motivates you or what inspires you to believe in God as a scientist now?
As a scientist, I would say the most amazing part is the nature of the universe, the fact that there's existence, and the fact that we have this magnificent thing called life and consciousness. Most of this stuff we take for example. I mean, we take for granted, I meant to say. We take for granted, but the fact is, it's not for granted that there's existence, and that we have consciousness of this existence. So those factors, I think, pull me to the fact that there must be something behind all of this, underneath all of this, and that certainly is the understanding of many of the quantum physicists. We always hear those scientists are always against God, not against God, but let's say they're agnostics, not atheists, but agnostics. They don't know. But if you look at them, at their basic writings, they're all searching for why is there something rather than nothing? Even the famous, the late, the blessed memory, Stephen Weinberg, who he's always quoted as saying the world seems pointless and there's no point. I've spent time with him, and he didn't seem to act that way when we met face on face and talked. But even he's his fantastic question, his statement. He said that even after we answer, if we could answer all the scientific questions that there are, we would still remain with the major question of why is there something rather than nothing? You know, why is there existence? You know, Marshall McLuhan, in his famous book, The Leaders of the Message, writes it so beautifully. He says, I'm not sure I discovered water, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't a fish. Now, why wouldn't the fish discover water? Because that's the same reason we don't question consciousness, existence, awareness. We just, by the time we're old enough to even question these things, we've been existing, you know, for so many years, we just take it for granted. But it is the basic question. Why is there something?
And you know, there's been a whole new wave of these very emboldened atheists, not just agnostics, I think, but real atheists, people who deny that there could be a God because we have this, you know, evolutionary, explanation. We can give an explanation for consciousness. I mean, do they claim that that evolution and random mutation, natural selection can create consciousness? You know, that we have an explanation. We don't need God to explain it.
That the level till you get to consciousness, the cop-out answer is we don't understand it, but it's the way the neurons. You realize there are like 100 billion nerve cells, neurons in your brain, and each cell has thousands and tens of thousands of connections. So you have such a complexity that must be how consciousness arises. That's the atheist. The persons that see magnificence in this, like just want to read this actually from Nobel laureate in neurophysiology, Eccles. The mind uses the brain to think as an instrument. Max Planck, Nobel laureate physicist. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as a derivative of consciousness. George Wald, Nobel Prize biologist. The stuff of which physical reality is composed is mind stuff. It is mind that is composed of the physical universe. That the universe, that consciousness is fundamental to the, what does it mean? Consciousness is fundamental. Consciousness, it's exactly, if you took Rashi, it's exactly what he says when he brings it to Proverb 8. I am wisdom. God used me to make the world. It's not that the first creation or emanation was the Big Bang of the energy, the magnificent energy of this Big Bang that exploded and became matter, and then matter became alive. The first emanation was something totally non-physical called wisdom. Not that God was wise to make the universe. That's not what it says. God used something totally ethereal. And that what's amazing, that's Proverb number 8. So that's, and Rashi. So what does that go take us back to over 3,500, about 2,500, 3,000 years ago for Mishlei, for Proverbs. This is exactly what quantum physics says today. And you'd only expect this at the quantum level when you get to the very fundamentals. You're not going to see this amazing reality that the universe is, in fact, an expression of a thought, which is right across physics all the time and at the quantum level. When you're picking up a hard-boiled egg or arranging a lamp or something, when you get down to the fundamentals, the quantum level, you discover there's nothing there, no thing there. That's not Jerry Schroeder's Bible thumper. That's not Jerry Schroeder speaking. That's physics. That's quantum physics. And I want to say, there is a book that became very famous called A Universe from Nothing, by Leonard Krauss. The science in it is magnificent. I mean, it's really, if you want to understand physics and quantum physics, it's on a honestly level. And he gets to the end of this book. I apologize for going, but this, I think.
No, please. What's the name of the book again? Tell us again.
A Universe from Nothing. I'm not recommending it for the following reason. I'm embarrassed that he's a Jew, but okay. He gets to the end of the book, and he has also Richard Dawkins. We finally driven the nail into the coffin of the idea that there's a God. The stupidity of that statement. His entire argument is based on how magnificent the laws of nature are. And it always comes back to quantum physics, as if in an interview, someone asked him, well, what about the laws of nature? Oh, you nitpickers, you always want to ask that question. But that's the whole answer. The whole answer is the laws of nature that derived and developed this magnificent world. And no one has an answer for that. It's not just it is true. You do not need, if you have the laws of nature, quantum physics and relativity, the laws of nature, you can create a universe from nothing physical. But you do need the laws of nature. And if you go to like a NASA site, or I have a video, it has about 3.5 million views on the main site. Someone did a search over there. It's up to 5 million web-wise. And it's called Proof of God in 5 Minutes. I get nothing from it. I signed away my rights, so I don't get a royalty from all the advertisements. Okay? I get nachas. By me, to get into the millions of views. The graphics are great. I didn't do them. The guys that filmed it did it, and it was done without any script. But it shows that the creation of the universe from absolutely nothing physical, as described by NASA, the National Outer Space Authority, and the entire video, except the last 30 seconds, is NASA data or NASA data. It is exactly the description of the Torah description of the creation of the universe and how God creates the universe from absolute nothing physical.
So you're saying that the laws of nature, okay, which you mentioned is quantum physics and theory of relativity and all that can in fact create the universe, something from nothing, but you need those laws of the nature. And where do those laws of the nature come from? So you don't believe that the world of science has an adequate explanation as to how these laws of nature developed, other than...
It has no explanation. Zero. It has no explanation. It doesn't have an adequate... It has no explanation. It takes it as a given, like consciousness. It takes it as a given. There's in Borden College in Maine, on the Seals Science Building, there's something carved into the stone. Nature's laws are God's thoughts. It's magnificent. Borden College, Maine. Nature's. I wonder if you can get that on a college wall today. This is carved into the building's walls, so they got to change the building. Nature's laws are God's thoughts, and that's exactly it. Nature's law. It isn't that you don't need some prompting along the way, because nature's laws are not enough to turn energy into a conscious being. Evolution doesn't work on randomness. And even persons like the late Stephen Jay Gould, who I knew is a lovely human being, he loved the Bible like he loved Gilbert and Sullivan. Even he who was a strong advocate for evolution, said, but there are channels. It's not a wide open field the way the mutations occur. They're channeled by certain laws. Oh, there it is again, by certain laws of nature. In other words, even persons who will say it's quote random, but the randomness isn't wide open. The randomness is in a field that is narrowed. It's not if it weren't narrowed, it would be infinite. So the fact that life, and that's why I use the word developed. If you use the word evolution, you are by force including that it's all random. Not because of the original meaning of the word of evolution, but how it is. I've had the good fortune over the many years at AISH that we had 4 confirmed avid evolutionists. Don't tell me differently, that for somehow reason wanted to come to the class. I hope they left. But all 4, when I asked them to define evolution, and this is crucial, here it was. It's a 2-stage process. The first stage is random mutations in the sex line produce changes in the progeny. The second stage is not random. Because of those changes, those mutations that were random, some cheetah are born fast, some cheetah are born slow. Well, fast cheetah get more food for the young than slow cheetah. Some lions is born strong and some are weak. So the strong lions kill the weak lion. That's not random. But what evolution says is random is the is the mutations that occur. And there's no space in biology for that. The field is too wide. It has to be channeled. But so when I talk about the development of life, I don't use the word evolution. I say, did life develop from the simple to the complex? Look, I certainly hope so, or the Bible's wrong. I mean, notice the Bible starts out first plant life, then the explosion of life in the waters, the Cambrian explosion of life. And that first mention of life is like whoever wrote the Bible with the big capitals letters went out on a limb. It says that let the waters, the first mention of animal life, let the waters teem with teams of living creatures. I don't know if I can put it out, but that's called the Cambrian explosion of life. Suddenly, out of the blue, every phylum that exists today in its most basic form appears. Suddenly, the Cambrian explosion of life. And Torah talks about it. So we have plant life, aquatic life, land life, and then finally human life, which is exactly what the fossil record says. We get 6 sentences, and the fossil record gives us 10 million samples. But it matches.
So let me just stop you from this. Is fascinating, and I really appreciate you breaking this down for us. So, when you argue that the complexity of the universe implies a deliberate, intelligent designer, so you're not saying that the 14 billion years, let's say, that evolutionists believe is the age of the universe, that's just not enough time for random mutation, natural selection to have created all this complexity, implying that if we had more time, it could happen on its own? Or is your argument that there's never enough time for any of this to happen on its own? And even if you believe in the multiverse theory, that there are multiple universes, for all that it doesn't matter. None of this could have happened on its own, no matter how many universes, no matter how much time. It has to start with some being responsible for the laws of physics, for the laws, for theory of relativity, quantum physics. There has to be some sort of force behind all of this to start. Is that the base? Is that the gist of the argument?
Well, there's 2 aspects in what you just brought up. First of all, I haven't studied all the theories of multiple universes. They're quite weak. But let's put all the theories for the origins of universes that I have studied. Okay, so I don't pretend I've studied them all require the laws of nature, and of those laws of nature, all require quantum physics. Well, now I'm saying I have not studied all, including string theory and everything else. Okay, but we don't have an infinite amount of time. We have 14 billion years. Life developed on the Earth. Okay, I'm not going with the fact that if life was that doesn't answer anything, because where's the cedar? Where's the cosmic Johnny Appleseed throwing the seeds around? That makes it even more theologically designed. So we don't have an infinite amount of time. We have 14 billion years. Those data are quite strong. And as the age of the universe calculations that I did, which are totally based on NASA, the NASA, and then the others that I are based on Torah numbers, they both match. And remember, Isaac of Akko, the primary student of Nachmanides, made are you familiar with the calculation?
Sure. Yeah. Well, tell us, share, please.
Well, it's 15 billion years. That's a calculation made that's the Ramban between 1250. So that's a 700-year-old calculation before anyone knew about dinosaurs or ages of rocks. And that is the only calculation. It's not like there's a dozen. I make that clear. Isaac of Akko was the primary student of Nachmanides. He says, this is my teacher taught me, but he was not allowed to tell it because he's a mikubal and the seed is lost. I will teach it. And he went out on a limb and he taught it. And Aryeh Kaplan saw the original document in one of the archives. And somehow all these things will end up in Russia for some reason, I guess. And then we don't have on one foot. We got 14 billion years. Let the universe speak. Is it billions and billions, gazillions and billions of years old? It's irrelevant to us. We're on Earth here. We started as a burst of energy, and over that time, life has to develop.
And if we had 20 billion years, would it change anything or not?
I can't pretend I've done enough calculations. Or 20 billion. No, you have to have probably like hundreds of billions of years.
But it could, if I'm just curious, I'm only asking this not to challenge, but to just understand the nature of the argument.
Please. People, sometimes people say, I don't want to challenge you. if I don't want to be challenged, I can stand in front of a mirror and aren't you wonderful? You are just so bright.
Right. Well, that's what's unfortunately happening in our day and age. We're talking just to people we agree with all the time. So, and I'm not anywhere near. I'm a total layman when it comes to these. But I just want to understand the argument that it is saying that if we had, let's say we had hundreds of billions of years, which we don't. I know we don't. Nobody claims that we do. But if we
have hundreds of billions of universes.
Well, forget the universes. Just let's say time. Let's say we had much more time. We had 30, 50 billion years of time. Could all of this complexity have developed on its own without there being a deliberate creator in the beginning who comes up with these laws of physics and of nature?
My guess is in our universe, no, because the difficulty, we know so little about the whole universe. You'd have to have many, many other platforms of life, which eventually be accessible from the Earth. And those platforms of life, like the Earth is just perfect. I mean, we don't have time to get into it, but and I think in one of my books, I list 15
I remember.
Earth is perfect, but you have to have others because the Earth isn't going to be around for another 20 billion years. There's going to be around for another 5 or so, but don't get worried. It's billions, 5 billion. Don't see the famous joke. I thought you said millions. Enough time wouldn't be enough. So you have to have that life takes these 15 or 15, 18 billion and then moves itself over to another planet that's much younger, but has Earth qualities of which we know none of at the moment, but maybe probably there are others. And then we'd have to hopscotch from planet to planet because no stars last long enough. The finite life of any particular star will not be long enough to satisfy the statistics. There's an excellent book that came out by Steve Myers, The Return of the God Hypothesis, which brings all the arguments together. And it's a very powerful argument for the need for a God.
It's called The Return. What is it called? The Return
of the God Hypothesis.
Okay.
Came out about a year or so, a couple of years. It's a compendium of studies of the need for time and conditions, and it's a very powerful statement.
Now, I'm told, Professor, and this is so helpful. I'm told that you were influential in helping a well-known atheist, Antony Flew, become a believer in a designer type of God. I'm so curious because a lot of people have said to me, listen, you have students who come into MJE who believe in God. You have students who don't. You're not going to change one from, you can just strengthen someone's belief. But apparently it seems like a real philosopher. Also, I Googled him. He's quite an accomplished philosopher. What did you say? What's that?
That's like an accomplished. When he published his thesis that there's no God in the 1950s, for the next 50 years, the next 50 years, that thesis was the most widely quoted, and that's the only thing that makes a publication. I published something in Science. If no one quotes it, I could have just stayed home and twiddled my thumbs. You don't get credit for publications. You get published that are quoted by other person. His publication that there's no God was the most widely quoted publication for 50 years in any field of philosophy. Forget theology, any field. Your position he had, I can tell you, when he made his conversion, he converted to a God, the poor guy was pilloried. When I got to work, when it came out in the news, it was announced on TV and stuff. And I get to Asia Tour. People started patting me on. I thought because I got to work on time or something. I mean, there were two people that are primarily involved. There were many persons, but there were two. I was one of them. The other, and he acknowledges that. The other is a man by the name of Roy Varghese, a Asian Indian that lives in Dallas, Texas, high tech. He written some very good books. He sent. I'm just going quickly to give a summary.
Yeah.
So he sent Roy Varghese sent his one or two of his books and a few of my books to Anthony. He read them, and then Roy said, "Look, I want to get you guys together." So he took me from Israel and an entity from England, and two other persons. We put us down downtown in New York City, where the university has a good film school. In any event, he documented on a DVD called "Has Science Discovered God?" And for 3 days, in between eating these magnificent platters of kosher food that God bless Roy. I mean, he really worried for me. He brought these downtown.
So you think it was the kosher food that convinced them there was a God?
It might have been. It really was. We were all eating it, and it was delicious. And the two factors that convinced Anthony, were that the universe had a beginning. Unless you study this, you think, well, maybe there was a beginning. Maybe the data say perhaps that there was a beginning to the universe, and that to say that life is complex is to say, like a perfect rose is, it's okay. I mean, complexity doesn't catch it's not a deep enough word. I don't think there's any word that I would recommend to anyone watching, listening, whatever. Just take a few hours off and just study something simple like photosynthesis. Just photosynthesis, what goes on in every leaf of a tree, every leaf of a flower. It's madness. It's just that. I'm not talking about life and neurons and brains and stuff. This is a plant. The complexity is over, and so the complexity of life and the fact that it had to develop in a certain amount of time were the two main factors that Anthony Flew.
So that the universe has a beginning, the Big Bang, I guess, and then the complexity. But he didn't. I'm just curious. I mean, he wasn't aware of those things beforehand. Like, what changed? He just.
What changed? He now realized that those were proven facts, not opinions. The fact is, if you only get some of the popular press, well, this magazine talks about it, but I hear these other people saying it's really not true, and maybe then they use a ridiculous argument, carbon-14, that tells you immediately they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, carbon-14 has nothing to do, and maybe to the fossil record, maybe 1%, maybe 1/2 of 1%. It's such a short-lived life, short-lived radionuclide. So those were the two, but I'll tell you he was pilloried. I felt so terrible for him. People called him. You realize how many thousands of people? He was the asmachta. How do I show this? He was a hook.
Right.
And they hung their atheism on him. Thousands and tens of thousands of people. He apologized. He said, "I follow the school of Socrates. I go to where truth leads me." And he apologized for leading people astray. Now, initially, it was a question: was it a deist God or a God that continues actively? And we were able to show that you have to have this deist God active for at least part of the time as the universe develops, or you can't get life out of a burst of energy.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
The question is how. Excuse me?
No, that's fascinating. I never really thought of. I always thought, like, our conversations about cosmology and all, well, not cosmology, about would have evidence, if you will, for a deliberate, intentional creator. But whether or not you believe that creator is involved in the world or in our lives, that's just a matter of faith, right? That's not something that can be, demonstrated scientifically. But you're saying it can be, that God is involved in the world?
You do that mathematically. I mean, that you can only do by statistics. So you can't prove, no one's looking over and watching the hand of God come in. Right. But the whole name of the game is, I mean, the name, pardon me for saying, the name of the game is free will choice. So, so if the world doesn't look natural, at least at some level, there's no free will left. Right. Even we see that with the splitting of the sea. We just get done reading about the splitting of the sea. And God needs a wind to split the sea. I'm going to give me a break. I presume God could do a more dramatic thing, just use a wind. And by the way, there is a wonderful study by the world's leading journal of meteorology that shows that a wind can split the sea. It's in the American Journal of Meteorology. So So the wind that split the sea looks so natural that what happened? The Israelites go through, and who follows them right on in? Now, how do we know that they look natural? Because when the waters are coming back and the wheels are getting stuck, they say, Ya Habibi, God is fighting for the Israelites. Then they realize it's a miracle. But the wind itself was a 40-mile-an-hour wind will split the sea.
That's fascinating.
So the world is always going to look natural. And so so what we can only do is work with statistics and see whether mathematically it makes sense that these reactions can occur in a time frame that the Torah gives us. And that's the great thing about the second half of the Bible, the one that's written in nature. The truth, Psalm 85, the truth shall spring from the earth. All these studies, the age of the universe, the Bronze Age, when the continental drift that opens these so the water is, there's enough water in the oceans if those depths, the Pacific and the Atlantic basin, didn't exist. And they only existed because of the way the earth cooled from its molten mass and then motions. If they didn't exist, the entire earth would be covered by 1.5 miles of water. Every bit, every piece on earth would be covered by, and so you see how these. I guess I'm getting off it, but just the idea.
No. Yeah, exactly.
So the point.
And what would your best explanation be then, if we can just take it? Obviously, you see no contradiction between the scientific belief that the world is 14 billion years old and the literal. I mean, I guess that's the answer, but I don't want to give it away. The literal Torah's account of 5,782.
Rashi says, Kaf Daled Sha'ot, that the days of Genesis in Hagiga, 12a. Yom, he says, Yom, day, it's the easiest Rashi anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yom, Kaf Daled Sha'ot, day, 24 hours. The Ramban on Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, you have to search for it, though, because it's not easily available. It's not with a big exclamation point. It says not only that the 24 hours, that the whole 6 days of Kamoshesha Yemei Avodah are like the 6 days of our work week. So that's the Ramban.
Mm-hmm.
Realize these are times when no one was worried about dinosaurs. How could they be why are they telling us they're 24 hours each? Because they are 24 hours each. I have to make that very clear. There are two views, or there are thousands of views, but in my work, I use the two views of the passage of time from the creation up to Adam, or the creation up to now. It's a very small, few thousand years difference, up to Adam. From the Bible's point of view, the days are 24 hours each.
Mm-hmm.
The Ramban, Nachmanides and Rashi teach us say that. They're not long periods. They're 24 hours each. But they see time from the beginning, and that was the great insight that I didn't have. The Ramban says it. Nachmanides says it. Why at the end of each day, the day is numbered? There's evening and morning, day one,
mm-hmm.
or one day. Evening, morning, a second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, the sixth day. Why, the Ramban asks, for those who know, Ramban is the shorthand for Nachmanides. Right. Why Nachmanides asks to say day one? Why doesn't it say a first day? It says second day, third day, give me a first day, but it says day one. Why does it say day one? It says day one because there is not yet a second day. Oh, really? I think by the time you get to Sinai, I think by the time that you get to Sinai, there've been quite a few thousands and thousands of days. The number just skipped from my head, actually, the calculations. So why it says day one? Because the Torah for the 6 days of Genesis see time and the development of the universe from the perspective looking forward from the beginning, from the creation. And those 6 days are a unit, and therefore they have a couplet. There was evening and morning, day one, evening and morning. Nowhere else in the entire Tanakh do you have that couplet, evening and morning, and then the day, evening. It's unique to Genesis chapter 1. Obviously, evening and morning are mentioned later, other places, but that couplet. is unique. So you have these 6 days. Day one, because the second day wasn't there. Really? Well, what's the only time where there wasn't a second day? From first day. So the Torah is seeing time for the 6 days of Genesis looking forward. Once you get to Adam, it splits. The calendar changes at Adam. How do we know that? Because we're told that Adam and Eve live 130 years and they have a kid named Seth. They're not living in outer space, they're living on the earth. So you have the 6 days leading up to Adam, which is always a separate calendar, ancient ever since the beginning of the calendar. Rosh Hashanah never commemorated the creation of the universe. It was always the creation of the soul of Adam. So that's the Torah. And those are 6 24-hour days. We look back in time from our platform. Oh, I think I lost everyone. Was I completely cut off there? I don't know. Anyway, and we look back in time and we measure from here, from an expanded universe. And it turns out, not by Gerald Schroeder, I did the calculation. But the physics is standard. It's astronomy. It's not relativity. It's astronomy. That when you look at it from here, from the expanded universe, and try to project the information back to the beginning, then as you go back towards the beginning, mathematically, the universe gets smaller and smaller. What's called the redshift becomes more and more compressed, and 14 billion years compress into 5.5 or 6 days. And that's those numbers. No one debates the numbers. They say I was just lucky. Doing the 14 billion years and projecting that based on principles of physical cosmology, and not relativity, just astronomy and cosmology. You take a measurement from here out now. This is the beginning back here. The Torah's point of view back here. And now I want to go back. What happens when I go back mathematically? The universe is getting smaller. Things are becoming compressed. What also becomes compressed is the perception of time. So the days are 24 hours each, but within those days, millions and billions of years of each day. So if you were watching it from the Torah's point of view, which obviously we can't do, you would see life, the world, in a video and super, super fast forward. The first 24-hour day would have 7 billion years squashed into it. The day is, and the video, it would take 24 hours to watch. Your clock would be going.
Right. So this is just to bottom line this. Basically, from the Bible's perspective, it's 7 24-hour days, which is the way you said Rashi and the Ramban both explain the verses in the Torah. But from a point of view of the relativity, in terms of relative time.
No relativity, just astronomy.
Just astronomy. Okay.
Not relative. It's the expansion of the universe.
Okay.
People make that statement. I apologize for jumping in on that.
No.
Even in my book and on my website, I say it's not relativity, it's just cosmology.
Expansion of the universe would make a 24-hour day appear as 7 billion years or actually be 7 billion years.
They're both true. If you took that expansion, on my website there's a calculation. I have no problem if you want to take it off the website and send it out to you. You don't have to. They're both. It's one reality from two different views. The Torah view, 6 24-hour days. True, from the Torah view, looking forward from the beginning. Our view, 14 billion years with the huge universe looking back. And those are 14 billion years.
I got you. Okay. Because it's interesting. I interviewed Rabbi Dr. Slifkin last week on this episode on the same topic. And he didn't like the explanation that each of the first 6 days of creation could have been more than 24 hours. Like could have been billions of years because we're left with a sequence issue. Because the way the Torah describes, for example, the way evolution and Torah record creation is different. He said that the Torah records that the plants were created before the sun. According to evolution, the sun came before the plants. So,
absolutely.
Rabbi, right?
I
so,
feel
Rabbi,
I have to. Can I address that? I am jumping in deliberately. Can I?
Yeah,
please.
Yeah, please.
Okay. First of all, the days are 24 hours each. Only person I know. Who Aviezer says in his book from decades ago also that the days were long periods of time, but he didn't know the Rashi. I can say that absolutely. How can I say that? Because I discussed this with him in front of several dozens of people, maybe hundreds, I don't remember the number. And he had never seen that Rashi. That today's at 24 hours. That's Aviev's book. Okay. With Slifkin's, I don't know Slifkin's understanding totally, but I disagree with him on this strongly, as does the Torah. Look at the wording. Look at the wording. And on this, Aviev's, and I agree completely. Look at the wording. When you get to day 4, the lights are called me'orot, luminaries, and you can see them. Me'orot do not appear before that. Before that, you have or. Me'orot, with the M sound at the beginning, for the person that don't know Hebrew, means it is the body that is giving off light. It is the luminary itself, and you'll see that in some English translations. Catch that. What's the difference here? The sun predates day. There's no word creation on day 4 or day 3. The word creation doesn't appear. But you can see the sun because how do we know that it's from the earth looking up? Because we said they now act as symbols for the seasons and for whatever, you can use them as signs, which means we can see these me'orot. We can see these luminaries. The atmosphere is clear. Transparent. Why? Because of photosynthesis and oxygen. Go back to day number 3. I do this. I apologize for taking your time.
Yeah, no. This is great. This is great.
Crucial.
So you're saying on day number 3, yeah, please.
Day number 4 is the plants, and they are the sources of light are called me'orot. The sources of light are called luminaries. You can see them. The atmosphere is transparent. What about day 3? If you look at historically, and it just happens because half of my doctor's on the earth sciences as well. The earth starts out with a very cloudy, a translucent atmosphere. I personally have measured photosynthesis when the clouds are so heavy that you can't see the glow of sometimes it's overcast, but you can see that the sun is there because you can see that particular glow behind. You don't see the sun, but I've measured photosynthesis when it's daytime, and you don't need a flashlight to get around, but the clouds are so heavy that you can't even see the glow of the sun. It's just all dispersed light. And the plants are pumping out oxygen right and left. You don't have to see the luminary, the me'orot that are described in day 4. The sun is there already.
So when was the sun? When was the sun created? And based on what? And based on what word?
Created. Creation does not appear for the sun. The word creation doesn't appear. It's formed. It's a huge difference. Okay, I apologize for jumping in, but
no. And when you say the sun was formed on day 3, is there any kind of reference in the Torah to that?
Let me. I'm gonna pull out the Torah and take a look. Where did I put my?
I'll get my chumash also. Hold on.
But the plants are just fine with because. But that is the me'orot versus orot.
So me'orot is the Torah's reference to some body on day 4, some body giving off light. But you're saying it pre-existed. Is that the sun me'orot though?
Yeah, you can see this. It says you can see these, and the sun of the stars. You can use them as signs in the. Okay, we're gonna get back to. Look at that verse, like verse number 15. There should be the me'orot. There will be luminaries in the sky, and we know we're looking up because we see them with verse 14.
Right.
Okay, that's that. Let's see now.
Right. Verse 14 says, "Vayomer Elokim yehi me'orot birkei hashamayim, lahavdil ben hayom ben layla v'ayu le'otot lomadim l'yamim v'shanim." Wait, what day is this now?
That's
a fourth day. Yeah. Okay. So where is there a reference to the sun being formed or coming into existence on day 3? I mean, maybe it doesn't have to be explicit. We don't.
Well, I could see to 1 verse 3. How's that? Vihi or. Notice there's no creation there. It's not creation. Vihi or.
Right.
So I'm not going to say that that's the sun, but it is interesting that our sun is only about 5 billion years, so that would 70. I'm just going to give the calculation. What is day? Is that called day one. I have to apologize. I have to make my head work more than it can work at the moment. Sun is at about 4, 10, 9, 8 billion years. It's at the cusp between day 1 and day 2. The sun, if I were plotting the two together, it'd be between 1 and day 2.
Right. So between one and
light,
right.
Notice, and that's or vihi or. It's not ordo. It's vihi or.
Between
So we do have light already mentioned. Okay, I'm not.
Right, and that's, I mean, there is, not every rabbi holds. It's a famous chazal, famous of our sages, that when it says vahi or in verse 3 of Genesis 1, that Rashi brings down the tradition that this was a special light that God put away for the tzaddikim, for the righteous people, that the masses couldn't handle this kind of light. That's not obviously talking about the sun. That's talking about some sort of spiritual force.
Right, that's for sure. But I'm just saying, it's an opinion. Let us make that clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So in other words, so that would be, so you don't like. So let me just go back to what Rabbi Slifkin was arguing. So he was saying, he quoted the Ralbag, all right, Gershonides, who said that the Torah mentions plants before the sun to demote the sun from its godlike status. I'm reading my notes from last week. Since so many people worship the sun, but not because plants were actually created before the sun, right? He formed. Okay, formed, but not because plants were, formed before the sun. He's saying that you don't really, the whole sequence is not really important in any kind of factual, scientific way, the way the Torah, the way the Bible describes the first 6 days of creation. You don't need to do that, he says, because the Torah is here to teach theology, philosophy, not science. And it sounds like you would, I guess, take issue with that a little, because you are trying to fit the science into the Torah, you're trying to reconcile the two.
I take offense at how you've made that sentence. I'm not trying to fit it. It fits.
Okay, good.
It fits. The ages fit perfectly. And if you look at what happens in those ages, and the thing is with the sun, if that light, first of all, we have origins of light. Now, we do know now, which is only like the last 20 years, that in fact, stars and galaxies appear very, very rapidly. So already on day 1, there are appearances of galaxies. I'm not saying the Milky Way was there. I don't recall the exact age of the Milky Way. It's hard to know anyway, but I think it would actually be towards the end of day 1, actually, the Milky Way would have formed. 7 billion years. Yeah.
Okay, so saying that, so you're saying that the sun was there earlier. It only became visible, let's say, in the sky on day 4.
Well, no, and may say this. No, on day when do the plants appear? Yeah, on day 4. Because I make and I'm sure Slifkin knows this, and others know this, that until they were plants, the atmosphere was opaque. No, it was translucent. I beg your pardon, it was translucent.
Mm-hmm.
I think of once when, before I was called up from Elohim, because of my age, I was called up after the war was going on, and I was doing measurements of. It has nothing to do with today's talk, except the fact that the overcast is so heavy. And I was measuring the production of oxygen, and not for these books or anything. Just thank God I was doing it. And a plane was coming. One of our planes was coming back from its raid, and it flew so low over to avoid the enemy radar, that I actually threw myself on the ground. I mean, you don't hear it coming, and then suddenly I wasn't going to hit me if I stood up. Very clear, but just to tell you the image going through
the image. Wow.
Oh, and it was completely overcast that day. You couldn't see any sun. It was mid-morning.
Right. So you're saying the sun could have existed, and that way, but here's a fundamental.
It wouldn't be visible,
Correct.
But there would be light.
Well, listen, I happen to be on a personal level. I don't know if you care, but personally, I prefer this explanation, because what I asked Rabbi Slifkin last week was, then you have to give theological explanations for all of the creations for the first 6 days. Why does the Torah go out of its way to say this happened here? And he says, it's all theology. It's all teaching ideas, not science. So that I'm trying to, that would, I think, be a significant difference between the two of you in your views. You
And
are,
Maimonides as well, because Maimonides says it's pure science. Read the introduction to the Gemara Nevuchim.
well, he was ironically, Rabbi Slifkin was quoting Maimonides to using Maimonides as not a proof, but as a source that these things should not be read literally, because Maimonides, we know, didn't read everything in the Torah literally, or certain parts.
But he does say that this Genesis chapter 1, I'm not saying he means it is science, he says. You can find, I guess I would say you can find science in it, because he does say it's the way it happened in his introduction to the word Nevuah. And Slifkin knows that also. It's not like I didn't discover that.
And you are of the opinion, this is very fascinating, you are of the opinion that these great rabbis, like Nachmanides and his student you mentioned, were able to give over these scientific theories. Why? Because they somehow were ahead of everyone else in their scientific age, or that their understanding of, let's say, Kabbalah or Jewish tradition gave them access to ideas hundreds of years before the rest of the scientific world would. How did they get this information, according to
I preface this by saying I'm a weak student of Kabbalah. I don't delve into it, but I don't see any other way to explain Nachmanides' insights other than that Kabbalah is real. It sounds crazy.
Wow.
And you do know that if you look at the gematria of the word Kabbalah, it happens to be the same number as the cosmological defined structure constant, which and this goes back. Whom did they ask? Who would be the person? One of the famous person like Lederman or one of these Nobel laureates went to, but who was he asked? He went to one of the sages. It would be about 80 or 90 years ago. Okay, but 50 years ago. And he said, we have a number in science. It doesn't make any sense. It just pops out. It's 137. And we can't figure out why. What is, and he was talking with a scholar, and the scholar's name he would know immediately. That's what I'm so.
That's okay. That's okay. There were a lot of great, yeah.
And he just says, that's the gematria of Kabbalah.
Gematria
I am not into gematria. I make it very clear. I am not. Okay.
Well,
and
gematria for those.
You'll find any gematria in my books.
For those of you, I know. For those of you listening, the gematria means the numerical equivalent of different letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, and then what Dr. Schroeder is explaining now is that the gematria of the word Kabbalah, all right, Kuf Bet Lamed Hey, is the same as the what? Explain it, because I don't know the science.
Structure constant. The fine structure constant of which is essentially a combination of these wonderful values that allow atoms to behave, ATOMs, to behave in a way that they can form molecules, and molecules can form big structures like you and me and the books behind your head.
Wow.
Behind my head.
Wow. Okay, we're moving on. So I just have one or two last questions for you. This has just been incredible. Please. Say it's credible, not incredible. Okay, I've never heard that. That's great. I love it. I assume that what the Torah says about how man was originally created, excuse me, God created man from the dust of the ground. The Torah says that God blew into his nostrils the breath of life. And of course, the modern evolutionists claim that human beings originated from ape-like ancestors and evolved over a period of a few million years. So how do we, are those things at odds for you? Are they one thing?
They're not at odds for me. You may sound like I'm taking too literally. It's Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 that people have the problem with. God, I don't have it right in front of me, but God took the earth from this and formed, and he formed Adam, dust from the ground, right? He formed.
Right.
First of all, creation does not appear in 2:7 because there's no creation that's involved in chapter 2:7. It's the formed. Now, forming, we know, does what? It takes stuff and time. That's the verb. The verb forming takes stuff, material, and time. So and the Torah says it, that God took stuff and formed him. So I say that forming, and you can argue against it or not. But that's only opinion. My opinion is that forming, we're talking about several million years. That chapter 2, verse 7. Okay, but then how the sentence develops is just magnificent. So I'm just going to read it in English translation, because I don't think everyone knows. God formed the atom, dust from the ground. Okay, and then He breathed the neshama, nishmat chayim. Notice the first beginning of the word neshama. The neshama is the soul of human. Mm-hmm. All animals have a nefesh. That's what gives you emotion, some levels of will. The neshama makes your free will realize that you're part of the human race. You understand things about it, including creation and stuff. So it says He brings into the neshama of life. Okay, so that would be the creation that's mentioned in chapter 1, verse 27, where in verse 26, let us make Adam. That takes time. Making, forming takes time and stuff. Next sentence, God creates the Adam. Thank you, Peggy Ketz of a wife for pointing that out. The Adam, God creates the Adam, and that's the neshama, which is mentioned right here in chapter 2, verse 7. He breathes into his nostrils the neshama, the soul, the human soul of life. And then this sentence has an extra superfluous letter, which is always there to teach. V'hi adam lenefesh chaya. And man became to a living soul. Okay? Became to. No English translation will ever catch that because it's ridiculous. It's not English. But the Hebrew has, and it's not Hebrew either. Man became le nefesh chaya, to a living soul. And on that to a living soul, on that one letter, the Ramban, what? The Lamed,
yeah.
The Lamed.
Just so everyone's listening.
The Ramban's overwhelming. He says this shows it from a lower level to a higher level, and with that, the being nehafach leish acher. Are you able to translate? My Hebrew is so sloppy.
Say it again.
Nehafach leish acher.
He became transformed or switched.
Go ahead.
He became switched. Nehafach means like coffee hafuch, upside down, like turned around. Leish acher, to another person.
Get that. You get that?
Yeah.
To another man, to another person.
Right.
Which means before this, there was a person. He doesn't say nefach leish. He says nefach leish acher. Before this, there was a person, but it wasn't a human. The neshama changed a being. I'll say put it this way: the neshama changed a person into a human, because the anthropology textbooks always confuse, and they use the word person.
Right.
Really, they mean person. There were people before humans. There were Homo sapiens that had a nefesh. They had your brain. They invented farming 10,000, 11,000 years ago, way before Adam. They were smart. They were smart guys and gals. They lived in a world that we'd all be dead in a week. But they weren't humans. The British Museum gives a date for this change. There's so many things. But look what the Onkelos says. The Onkelos says Onkelos is what year would you guess Onkelos would be about? How many?
I don't know. Quite old.
Years ago. It's at least 1,000, way over 1,000 years.
Oh yeah, more than 1,000 years.
It's like 1,800 years. Okay. Onkelos says that the person became ruach mamalala.
Yeah.
Became a speaking spirit. And if you realize what that's saying, that our essence, it's what Teilhard says. We are not physical beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And I think that teaches you life after death.
Wow.
We're not, he could have written Chayama Malala. He could have said, we're speaking animals. But he doesn't. He says we're speaking spirits. And it is, I think that Teilhard's statement is just magnificent. He's an Anglican priest, I think. We're not physical beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience.
Who said that? I'd love to get that. What's his name?
It's a big French name. Tillard is his last name. I could never pronounce it. Something like Shidon Tillard, Tillard, approximately.
Oh, Tillard, last name. Okay,
Tillard,
got it.
yeah,
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah.
So we're not physical beings having a spiritual experience, but a spiritual being having a physical experience, and that, and what you said about that we became a speaking a spirit. Yeah. That's so powerful. Does that imply that, let's say, these humans before they became people, okay, or is it the other way? No, people before humans. So they had some communication skills, like we see like some animals have.
They invented farming 11,000 years ago. They could say, why would you put a seed in the ground? The neighbors must have been saying, you're crazy. It's going to rot in there. Eat it now. There's no Stop and Shop down the street to get more grains. But they said, I can foresee I've seen these fall into the ground before. And I've noticed that plants grow with 1,000 seeds on them. Farming is phenomenal. But what didn't invent was writing. It goes back to the time of Adam. And the first big cities. And the British Museum dates this change. I spoke with the curator. I'll tell you, Barbara and I were giving lectures in London back to back, and we had the afternoon free. And we didn't go to the Science Museum. I apologize. I just have to say this because
please. This is very powerful.
We went to the British Museum. I had no idea. We had no idea. There's a whole wing, not a room, a wing, the Mesopotamian wing.
Mm-hmm.
In it, they have a plaque that says the first large cities and the invention of writing and a major change in civilization. Okay. And they give a date about 5,500 years ago. Sound familiar? The curator comes out. I speak to the curator. I don't mention Adam, Neshama, and Bible. Zero. I said, what is it? What is it that made this change? What he says, it wasn't the population explosion. The change have suddenly big cities. Big cities mean division of labor. Some on the farms. So you have to trade. That requires writing. And that's the origin of writing. We see it from the early writing. And it dates back to so I said, what made the change? And his answer was exactly, I always like to use this, in Gemara Brachot, in Blessings, page, oh, come on, don't lose my head. It's somewhere in the first 10 folios.
Okay.
I think it's the most important statement possibly in all of Talmud. Pardon me for saying so.
Wow.
I'm not an expert. And it says, and he gave the answer right out of and he didn't say the Mishnah. That Mishnah there says, teach your tongue to say, I don't know. Teach your tongue to say, I don't know. He said, I don't know. This is the major change in civilization, and we have no explanation for it. The Torah's got the explanation. Torah's the explanation. The neshama comes into the world, changes the world sociologically. It spreads, takes a few hundred years to spread, comes in 5,800 years ago. By 5,500 years ago, there are enough humans to form large cities. Before the neshama, you couldn't have a large city. If you didn't look like me and smell like me and talk like me, I had you for dinner, roasted or boiled. It was a dog world.
Right. Literally a dog-eat-dog world. Right.
Yeah.
Wow. I've never heard that, Dr. Schroeder. That's incredible. So,
and that's the British Museum. Pardon me for saying this, but I tell you, when Barbara and I saw that date, you had a plaque on the wall saying when all this. You have to, I've been teaching this for several years now, but I still get covered. My kids say, Abba, your hair is, when I had more hair, my hair is standing up on end. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming.
That's incredible. Dr. Schroeder, this is just amazing.
Incredible.
I have to tell you, besides the actual information that you're sharing, the wisdom that you're sharing, your passion and your excitement, is just, you're like a little boy, if you don't mind me saying. I hope that's not disrespectful, but you are just like a curious young, man who is just found out like a revelation from God. And these are revelations and they're in the Torah. And I happen to absolutely love this approach because I've always been a little uncomfortable with like, well, you keep if we keep looking at verses in the Torah and saying, well, they can't really teach us this, they can't really teach us that, this is really in sync. It's in sync with cosmology. It's in sync with evolution in terms of the formation of man. And this thing from the British Museum is just incredible. That large cities writing, and I've been to the British Museum. I need to go back to the Mesopotamian wing and see this, because this is just incredible.
Yeah, no, it's just credible. It's just credible.
Incredible. It's credible. It's
yeah, it's
really
amazing.
credible.
It's just so exciting that.
It's funny. My last question was, as a scientist, what in the Torah inspires you and helps you in your spiritual journey, in your relationship with God? But I think you just answered it. If there's something else that you want to share about what studying science does for you as a religious Jew, please, because that might be a good way to bring this amazing conversation to a close.
Well, it's just that the more you study science, the more you understand the magnificence of the universe, the beauty of it. As someone once wrote, knowing the physics behind a rainbow doesn't make the rainbow less beautiful. I don't see how the wisdom that is confirmed by science, in theory, a person has really true belief. That shows my weakness. But I see this confirmedness that the science comes. That wisdom that's hidden in these, the apples of gold and silver dishes, the Proverbs 25, I think is wisdom is 3,500 years old, written, and it's as good as if it were written today. I mean, the depth of knowledge. I don't see how a person could have known these things.
Well, it's very, very compelling. It's extremely helpful to me on a personal level, and very, very helpful to our listeners, many of whom struggle with these issues. And you are a walking embodiment, I believe, of what the Rambam, the great Maimonides, wrote when he said, if you want to know how to fulfill the mitzvah of the V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, to love the Lord your God, he said you have to study nature, and you have to learn to appreciate the world around us. And that's what you're doing by continuing to write and teach. You are enabling all of us to come to a love and an appreciation of God that we could never have, because most of our ability to grasp science is limited. I'm saying from the layman perspective, most of our listeners, I don't think are, anywhere where you are scientifically. I know this, but you are giving us a window into seeing and appreciating God through your vast knowledge of science and physics. And I really, really appreciate your time. Hashem should bless you, that you should be able to continue to teach and to study and to continue to write. Please know that those of us reading your books and listening to you speak are paying very, very careful attention. These are incredibly critical issues. And I thank you so much for your time here. Thank you.
No, totally my pleasure. And I just urge you on Proof of God in 5 minutes, Gerald Schroeder on Google. I get nothing from this. I want to make it clear, but it can help a lot.
Proof of God
from the emails I've gotten.
Right. Proof of God in 5 minutes. What is it called? It's on Google. It's on, by the way, I know I don't want to take longer, but some people don't like to use the word proof because, Lawrence Kellman wrote that book, Permission to Believe, which I thought was very good. I don't know if you've ever seen those books, 4 Rational Approaches to the Belief in God. Are you okay with that word? I mean, do you really think this is, maybe you do, which is fine.
Are you asking me?
I'm asking you, yeah, in terms of the word. I just asked whether or not, can you use the word proof? This is very heavy evidence. This gives a very heavy rational basis to believe in God. But is there proof? Is this proof? I mean, I'm going to go and watch the video.
I always say you can't prove God, even though I have that video, Proof of God in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. I would say it has to be strong enough evidence so that looking at the data, you would feel that the overwhelming conclusion would be there is a force behind this.
Gotcha. That's a great way to end. Thank you so much. Dr. Slifkin, thank you so much for your time and just the best.
Schroeder.
Did I? Oh my God, I just called you Rabbi Slifkin. Well, by the way, it was extremely helpful to clarify that distinction. I don't know if you know Rabbi Presby, who's also a physicist. He's the grandfather of a student of mine here in New York City, Nathaniel Schlankman, who comes to MGE. And he just came out with a book called The ABCs of Science. I'm interviewing him next week. And one of the things I wanted to do, and this was really helpful, is to see where some of the distinctions are, some of the arguments are between you, Rabbi Slifkin, and let's say Rabbi Presby next week. But I really, really appreciate this. This is really very, very special. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Be well and stay healthy.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. And I look forward, by the way, we are bringing a group to Israel this summer. It would be such a great, great honor if we could perhaps bring our group to see you. I don't know if you get to New York ever, but it would also be a great honor to host you here. You let us know if you ever come into New York in the near future. Thank you.
As soon as the virus is,
I know.
If you're here, please, you got my phone number. Be
Yeah.
sure
We'll be in touch. Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Take care. Thank you.
Okay, you too.
Thank you.